Okay, welcome Miami. This is Rob Piper here, and welcome to the first 2020, the first Zoom site chat of 2025. I'm really excited. This evening, we're going to have our former City of Miami commissioner, former chairman of the Miami City Board of Commissioners, Ken Russell. He's going to be joining us for this first chat, and he is going to educate us. Again, the purpose of these Zoom site chats is to make the city government, local government, a little more accessible to the average folk. And we're really, really, really privileged to have Commissioner Russell here to kind of take away a lot of that mysteriousness of how the government works and what goes on at City Hall. And we are very, very, very privileged to have someone his with his experience and his insights to share with us tonight. And this is going to be a regular thing. This is going to be regular content that I'm gonna be posting on the YouTube channel for the Democrats of Coral Way. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Commissioner Russell.
Great. Thank you, Rob. And thank you for taking the initiative to do this because not enough people do, and people feel left out. And so they just sit on the sidelines where it should be accessible to everybody and everyone can make a difference in whichever way they choose.
Thank you. And so I guess my first question and a little bit of background there, you're aware of the of the tree ordinance that's been proposed, the changes to the City of Miami tree ordinance and all the grassroots work that's going towards getting that proposal withdrawn. Amongst our conversations in the WhatsApp group, you mentioned a thing called commission diplomacy. I thought that was really interesting, and I was hoping you could shed some light on what exactly that is for us voters, based on your experience.
It's more of an oxymoron in the city of Miami because there's very little diplomacy on the city of Miami Commission. It's cutthroat politics at its finest. And people say, oh, it's that way everywhere, but we do have a special brand of politic in the city of Miami that definitely leans toward a third world flavor of rhetoric and technique and I don't mean that it's underdeveloped. I mean in that it's actually more sophisticated in terms of its savvy, dirty politics. And so you once you acclimatize yourself to that, you really need all the tools available to you as either a legislator or an activist to understand what levers to pull and what moves them and what influences their vote amongst each other. The city of Miami is the largest city in the country with only 5 commissioners. And that's a very unique thing when you look at a city like Chicago or New York, where it's in the dozens. And at minimum, another city this size should be at least 7. And the reason is you want to dilute the power amongst the dais so that a single bully cannot come in and override everything. Especially in the city of Miami, where we have a weak mayor system. The mayor does not sit as the chair of the commission, does not cast a vote. It's the children are left running the asylum, with the mixed metaphor. But what the commissioners can do is very, very powerful. So you have the overarching document that governs the city, which is our charter, and that is our constitution. The commissioners cannot change that without going to the voters through referendum. So those are our unchangeable laws. Below that charter document, that constitution, is our code of ordinances. And you hear of laws at the federal level, you hear of statutes at the state level, municipalities have ordinances. And those are malleable. Those are in a book of ordinances, a big code book, but commissioners can change that with 2 readings and a simple majority. So it only takes 3 out of those 5 to change the code of the city. And that code are the general, not even day to day, very big, impressionable things that determine what we can or cannot do with our properties, with our businesses, and everything from, I mean, just you name it, the green space issues, permitting, all those things. All those things fall under the city of Miami code. And so they shouldn't be confused with what happens in county law versus state law versus federal law, but it's very specific, but it's very easily changed. And a lesson for me, because I wrote the tree protection ordinance several years ago, It's now being changed by a simple majority and a two reading vote. And they can undo all the good that we worked so hard for as activists, a community, and as legislators back then, just by the will of a new commission. That diplomacy has to do with what each of them need from each other in that moment, short term and long term. And because that commission is so small, you have to work with your enemies on a regular basis because you are 20% of the vote. Mayor doesn't have a vote. The five commissioners, of those five, you are one. So you already have 20% of that vote ready to go. You only need two other commissioners to agree with you for most any ordinance change. And so you have the sponsor who brings that ordinance, and sometimes there's co-sponsors, and then they have to convince at least two of the others to go with them. They typically tend to try not to offend even the no votes. They'd let them have their, hot air, go against it, whatever. But as long as I've got my three, the only intelligence you need to be a city of Miami commissioner is to count to three. If you can count to three, you can be a city commissioner. And how you get there is that quote unquote diplomacy. It's also known as leverage. It's also known as quid pro quo. It's also known as a lot of things. But very rarely does it actually have to do with the merit of the actual item. You want to know what day that item is coming on the agenda and what other items are on that agenda that need your vote as a commissioner. And then, even beyond that, what time of day on the agenda their item is versus yours. Because if you show your cards early in the morning and give them everything they need, will they be there for you in the afternoon and vice versa? It's really horrible horse trading that has nothing to do with policy, but it has everything to do with the relationships on the dais and what they're trying to accomplish. Very quickly, someone who's an outsider like a Damian Pardo or a Miguel Gabella who come in on promises and true intentions of reform in government realize that if they don't learn that chess on that dais to find their additional two votes, they will soon be a potted plant sitting outside of a 4-1 vote regularly, which is where Damian risks being on this tree ordinance, because he's the only one who truly cares about and his constituents care about this tree canopy issue. It's sadly the fact that the other commissioners aren't going to be held accountable for hurting the tree canopy in their districts. And so he can easily pound the desk and say, I'm against this. It's a piece of garbage. You guys are horrible. How can you do this? And he will lose 4-1. So he's trying to take a diplomatic course where he goes, Commissioner, I hear what you're concerned about with the permitting on a resident who wants to put a simple swimming pool at their house and they can't. I hear what you're saying about reasonable removals that could damage my car or my roof, and I'm not getting the permit that I need. He's trying to be diplomatic about it, where I hope that in his heart, he's really disgusted by the potential damage that this ordinance can do. Only he knows, where he really stands. But in order to fix this, he cannot say, you as a commissioner, fellow commissioner who sponsored this must withdraw your ordinance. It's just simply very rare and very aggressive. I've done it before, and it can be done, but it's a powder keg. It has repercussions. So that's a little primer on diplomacy on the dais.
Can you discuss like a little bit deeper about the instance where you just mentioned that you've actually tried, uh you've actually been there to try to get an ordinance removed? And I mean, if you would please describe that situation where you had to deal with that and the repercussions that you experienced.
Yes, I have withdrawn my own ordinance in the past where I was very passionate about something, but I could see I had no votes for support. And rather than set the bad precedent of getting a no vote on it, which I saw coming, I simply withdrew it to try to, live to fight another day. And for example, in the one case was the neighborhood conservation district amendments, where I had brought a very comprehensive legislation that took me 6 months to put together, but I bit off a little more than I could chew because it had a lot of good things in it that were not controversial, but then it had one item in it that every developer hated, and it had to do with trees and it had to do with lot coverage. And so I was trying to limit how massive a building could be on a given lot based on its square footage, and the square footage of the lot. And the the result of that would have put us on par with all the surrounding cities that have this lot coverage. It's called an FLR, a floor lot ratio ordinance of 50%. Meaning, if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, you can have a 2,500 square foot house. That doesn't exist in the city of Miami. In other communities, it does, where you go to Coral Gables or Key Biscayne or different places. There, and that's why you don't see the same massing that you do in those communities that you see in city of Miami and Coconut Grove, for example. All we have is setbacks. And so, despite how big your lot is, you can pretty much build to within your setbacks. And if you maximize your setbacks on the side, the back, the front, and the top, what do you get? A cube. And that sounds familiar. It's not an architectural design element. It's a financial monetary formula based on our code to maximize profits on a given lot. And so I was trying to pass that thing that would limit that. And developers weren't having it, and the other commissioners weren't having it. And rather than get a no vote, I actually moved to withdraw my own ordinance. I had made efforts to withdraw other commissioners' ordinances before. And sometimes when they're not on the dais and their items coming up, it's very aggressive. It really sends a message like, don't sleep on your items. If you're not here and your item's up, we're going to eat it alive if we think it's a bad ordinance. But it's very rarely done and sends a very strong signal of uncordiality on the dais. It's declaration of war, basically, and they'll get you back.
When you say like they'll get you back, I mean not necessarily just one, but like a group of them could come and ally. Is it
Yes.
safe to say that they will ally against you as a means to teach you a lesson?
Yes, and everybody has their role up there, and you can, if you follow commission, it's like a soap opera. You've got some folks that are pretty neutral and just go with the wind of where they see things going. Some people are very passionate about some things, and some people are just punitive. People like Joe Carollo and Alex Diaz de la Portilla, they fall into that punitive category, where it's a bit of a Trumpian psychology or tactic that I'm going to create so much chaos and pain that you're going to think twice about going against me in any way on anything. Because even though your little thing of disagreeing with me might be small to you, I'm going to punish you so hard on the back end in terms of budget and votes and just coalition building against you. And then the commissioners who are neutral, like say the Christine Kings, for example, who tend to be swing votes and the chairperson or the mediator, don't end up truly acting as a mediator because they see where the power votes are and they gravitate toward them. So if a Joe Carollo is on a rampage to hurt another commissioner, she won't stand with that other commissioner. She'll stand where the power is, which is usually Joe's position. And she'll say, oh, I'm just going with the majority. But often she ends up creating the majority. For a perfect example is my very last meeting as a city commissioner. I was supposed to have one more meeting before leaving office. And they all decided, hey, why don't we quit in November and take December off because it's good for staff and it's Merry Christmas to everyone. But what they knew they were doing was killing my last meeting where I had tons of good initiatives that I was trying to leave office with. And they also wanted to humiliate me by not letting me get my gold watch. There's no physical gold watch, but the ceremonial last meeting where they, thank you for being a commissioner and, proclamations or whatever. I never got that because they wanted to rub my nose in whatever they wanted to punish me for from votes past. But for example, two of them were willing to do that. And she said, well, I'm just going to go with the majority. She ended up being the third vote that created that majority that killed it. But she got to look like a neutral participant in that fight. And so you'll find the ones that are very strong about what they're trying to do, and then the ones that aren't very strong about what they're trying to do. And it doesn't take much. On a small dais like ours, one person can be that bully that scares the others, at least one or two of them, out of having the strength to stand up to them. And then it only works if everyone stands up to them. And I tried that from the very first day Joe Carollo came in office. I voted for him to not get the chairmanship of the Bayfront Park Trust. And that set the tone for our relationship going forward. Because I really thought, and the buzz was coming in, this bully from decades ago is coming back, and we're only going to stand strong if we stand together. So I really thought that when I made that motion, the other commissioners would go, "We agree with you, Commissioner Russell," and hold him contained. And all of them got scared. I had put my chin out, and he just reared back and swung at it. And everybody else was scared to stand with me. So I was on my own in that case. And so he got the chairmanship, but then decided he's going to punish me from there forward for having even considered defying him. Where he had no entitlement to the Bayfront Park Trust. It's not in his district. There's nothing in law that says it goes to the District 3 commissioner. I mean, it was a simple disagreement, but it turned into a big thing. A larger commission would solve that so much. If we had a 7-person or 9-person commission, you couldn't have those same sort of factions.
So as I understand, the Commissioner Carollo, he was he's been in Miami politics for decades, but at that point, so you had been on the commission longer
Mm-hmm.
than he had.
Yes, I was definitely senior in terms of current years on the commission, but I'm 51 years old, and he was a commissioner in the city of Miami when I was 7 years old. And we have term limits, so I don't know how that math works, but that's city of Miami loopholes for you.
Oh, okay. So yeah, just from what you can see, how I mean, I might be asking a rhetorical question, but I'll ask it anyway. How is it that someone can amass that much soft power, that much psychological power over over the single legislative body of the city of Miami? Is it just a question of seniority, just a question just being around, just being around for so long, or knowing where the being around so long that you know where the pressure points are within government,
Mhm.
within the different coalitions? Can you comment on that?
So, no, it's not about seniority. It's about, and this goes back to the Trump psychology. And Joe likes to think that he helped invent Trump, because back when he was a city manager in Doral, Trump was coming in there with the golf course, and he said, I had to negotiate with Trump. And there's a lot of parallels there, because what you need in order to wield that kind of strength, power, and fear is a sociopathic willingness to deal with the negative consequences of your chaos. And you're seeing that with Trump, who's literally playing Russian roulette with our entire country. And he's only been lucky so far in his first term and the start of his second term to be firing blanks, meaning that his actions have not had the consequences that have imploded our economy or put us into war or caused another terrorist attack. But it
Yeah,
could any day. That
yeah,
chamber could be loaded on the next tweet he makes. Now, the parallel at the local level is a willingness to burn the house down to have your way. And that doesn't work when that doesn't work for those of us who follow the rules of a normal society and legislative body. We aren't willing to go that far down that rabbit hole. My wife used to tell me, why don't you just go toe to toe with him, and don't let him one up you on. But what I realize is I'm not willing to go to the dark places he's willing to go, legislatively, politically, and playing with the truth, or being punishing to residents and the budget. He's literally willing to sacrifice millions of dollars of city budget in order to settle a score or win a fight, or have his own legal debts paid, or whatever the case may be. And I'm not willing to do those things. And I realize that whole idea of getting in a what is it, a fight with the pig, you just end up getting as dirty as the pig, and the pig likes it. Like, I'm not willing to be that legislator. So I had to draw my line and find my limits. But what you unfortunately can easily get drawn into is the lull of trying to earn his favor when you need those votes, because you have your own initiatives. You really want to deliver for your district, your community, your city. And so very often you will need a vote of that person that you hate the most, because a small dais like that, you can't find your votes elsewhere. They don't exist if he's being a bully and those who aren't standing strong are too easily swayed. They'll vote against even your good government legislative policies if it doesn't even hurt him, if he's trying to put you in a corner. And so the remedy is to play chess in a very smart way, that when he needs you as well. and always stand for good government. Never vote against your conscience on something that you care about, but also don't be obstinate. Like I'm not gonna. I voted for the new official flag of Little Havana, which was really I we didn't know what it was going to be until it was unveiled at the Artemi Theater, and we did that to support Joe in that moment on something that had no practical um, substantive change for Little Havana. It was something that he wanted to do out of pride, and it didn't matter how artistically correct or inspiring the flag was. It was just there to support Joe on something that didn't hurt the city, but that helped him. That he was trying to accomplish for his community. And so why would I vote against that? Just out of spite. I went and helped and spoke at the thing. And sometimes you get punched at because people are like, oh, wait, you're in that photo standing next to Joe Carollo or shaking Joe Carollo's hand. You'll see that every day if you go to city commission. We go every morning, like Sam and Ralph from the Warner Brothers. I don't know if you remember the old Bugs Bunny cartoons where the sheepdog and the coyote would show up for work and shake hands and then beat the crap out of each other all day and then shake hands on the way when they punched out.
I remember.
Joe off the dais, you quickly learn, is just playing a character to achieve his goals. He'll be very soft spoken and very cordial and very polite off the dais. And it's all an act to achieve a goal. So once you learn that and try not to get emotionally vested in even though these very important issues you're trying to accomplish, you can play the chess a little better to get your work done. I hope I'm not depressing anybody here. I'm sorry to really be so brutally honest about how ugly it is in Miami politics, but it is bad.
Yeah, I mean, no, I please be honest. Perfect segue. Is there are there things that like voters could do?
Absolutely.
Voters are aware of all the little nuances, for lack of a better word, of the commission diplomacy or the commission politics. What types of things can voters do to at least influence that, or at
Mm-hmm.
least make it a little less just bogging down of good
Yeah.
initiatives.
Yeah. Well, first, always be an optimist because a lot can be done more at your local level than at any level of government. And you really can change things as a voter, as an activist, or even as a candidate. And it's a slippery slope. The first step is simply caring. You don't have to have a law degree, but by the fact that you're even watching this stream right now means that you care enough to learn about it. Maybe you already know about it, but you care about it to learn more or get involved in some way. And that is what activates you as a voter. That voter certainly learns the issues clearly enough by educating themselves on how to vote, on who to vote for, or ballot initiatives, or you name it, that then they start maybe becoming an activist because they realize that what they're voting on, they either are losing that vote or at risk of losing that vote because the powers that be are going the other direction on something they care about. And then they go from being a voter to being an activist. And it's very easy to fall from being I don't say fall, but to climb from being an activist to then becoming a candidate. Because every new room you enter that you think is so out of your reach because you don't have the education or the degree or the experience or the money or the name, you get into that room and you realize I'm surrounded by people who are as smart as I am or less, who are passionate as I am or less. I can make a difference in this next room. So whether it's just becoming an educated voter or becoming an activist or becoming a candidate, anyone watching this is qualified for all of those levels, of course. None of those are unachievable or unreachable. And you just simply start consuming knowledge and putting that to work, be a good listener, be a good learner, and then make good decisions.
Another perfect segue. You kind of touched on this earlier. The regarding say what are like for those people that come into those that enter those rooms, the do's and don'ts of the types of things that they're going to run into, the types of things that they should be aware of, the types of things that they shouldn't do, types of things that they should do. Like what are the do's and don'ts that that volunteers or voters or newly newly elected commissioners need to be aware of?
Yeah, ignore those rules. Everyone around you is going to try to put you in a box and tell you how you're supposed to act, what you can and cannot do. And it's intimidating because you don't at first have those tools to know the true answers, right? Um, and so for myself, my personal experience, for those who don't know, I was not an activist until I started fighting for the park in front of my house as a resident that was contaminated by the city and they weren't doing anything about it. I certainly wasn't a lawyer or a land use attorney when I decided to run for office and didn't know how to campaign or fundraise or build a message or a following or a vote base or anything. And then when I got elected, I certainly was not ready and equipped to write legislation, which is the primary job of a city commissioner, not having a background in law. I didn't know the difference between an ordinance and a resolution. And these are things that commissioners vote on. So don't be intimidated by that. There's a lot of fake it till you make it, but surround yourself by the people who can help you be prepared. I did that as an activist. I did that as a candidate, and then I did that as a new elected. I brought on a very young team of staff because I didn't trust anyone from the old guard of the city that had the gravitas or experience. So I got what was jokingly called a group of doe-eyed millennials that were smarter than me in law, for example, or land use, or politics, or media, or development, all the things that you end up dealing with on the commission that we vote on. You know, the things we vote on with regard to land use and zoning and development and green space and all these things. I didn't know those things. I knew what my intentions were, and I came in on a single issue of green space activism. But I ended up having to serve in a quasi judicial role, hearing legally binding appeals and acting as a judge, as the chairman of the commission with a gavel and the whole thing. So you have to learn quickly, but don't be intimidated because we have Chat GPT now, and you know, beyond that, of course, I say it jokingly, but there's such resources out there for you to learn the steps you need. Oh,
Like,
I'm sorry, I missed it. Okay, I will. That's my wife.
no worries. So the resources you talk about, well, I guess it sounds like you surrounded yourself with a mastermind group of people that knew that knew the differences between an ordinance and a resolution. First of all, what is the difference between an ordinance and a resolution in the city of Miami? And how did you find the people that you surrounded yourself with? And three, I guess, what resources were you able to find when you were trying to accelerate your learning curve?
Yes, an ordinance is a piece of legislation passed by the commission that changes the code of the city. So not the charter, but that code of ordinances are laws. Don't spit on the sidewalk. A house can only be this tall in this type of neighborhood. If you want to cut down your trees, you have to get this sort of permit. Those are all ordinances within the code that builds our basic laws that the city, the police even follow. They and the code department, when they issue a citation, it's because for violation of one of those codes. An ordinance is a legislative action to change that code. A resolution is a direction of the commission, which can give the manager or the mayor direction on what the body of the commission's will is. We would like to see an audit of the finances of the tree trust fund. We pass a resolution directing the manager to have that audit ready for us in 60 days. That's a resolution. So it is binding. It's a binding legislative act of the body, but it doesn't change the code of the city. It's less impactful in that sense of permanence or semi-permanence. The other question is, how do you find these folks who know more than you do? When you campaign for that position, uh, people who care about what you care about begin to follow your campaign, and they start to weigh in because they quickly see what your intentions are, but also what your limitations are. If you're honest in your campaign, they'll see where your strong points and your weak points are in terms of your experience, your background, your history. Like not being a lawyer, those with background in law from the Engage Miami group, for example, were very quick to help when I wanted to change the charter to make it stronger, and I didn't know how. It was actually one of the founders of Engage Miami that was my appointment to the Charter Review Committee that ended up bringing the change that I was able to vote on, send to the ballot, the voters, and change the charter of the Constitution, our charter, to give standing so residents can now sue the city for violations of the charter. Never was the case before. But I would never have known how to do that but for that attorney who happened to be a founder of Engage, who enjoyed my campaign, followed me, and then wanted to help me accomplish those goals. As long as you're not saying, I have all the answers, just get me into office so I can fix everything. As long as you have that willingness to say, I'm going to be in a position to open the door and have an open ear and open mind for those who do want to change their community, I will help empower you to do that. Bring me those ideas, bring me that expertise you have, and I will help find the political will to pass it. I'll play the chess to get the votes. You bring me the ideas, the expertise in the background. That was my case because I'm not a lawyer. Maybe someone coming in who is an attorney who has those answers might come at it differently. But that was my voice as a previous environmental activist going, if I could be in that position as an open door for activists, how would I act? Like, what would I be able to empower? And that is a flame for moths who care about these issues. They will come flocking to help you and work on your staff, volunteer, intern, or campaign, or whatever it is, to show up for the issues that you're trying to pass. And that's how I built my team. I didn't have cronies at that point, right? So everybody on my team were new folks to me, but they weren't masterminds either. They were young. Because I couldn't afford, with the budget of a city commissioner, people who were attorneys of repute of many years. I had to find young attorneys who were fresh out of college, and thank God. I mean, it was a refreshing view of people who cared about the issue versus more expensive folks who might have been more jaded or whatever. But it was a great group. I'll never forget the folks that were on that first team that really taught me how to be a commissioner.
Did you get to, were you able to, I guess, are commissioners, are they adequately funded to be able to get sufficient staff in order to assist them in their legislative responsibilities?
It's a great question. Very few people know the budget of a city commissioner. It's very hard to find online, nor the salaries of commissioners and their staffs. It's not readily published at all. When I first got into office, a city commissioner actually gets paid much more than typical commissioners around in public office. They're right around $100,000 before taxes, which is much more than you see at the county, like a $6,000 salary, or different cities that some don't give anything. They pack a lot of fringe benefits in there, so that it's well paid enough. It's certainly not going to be enough to sustain you to live in Coconut Grove, for example, as a single breadwinner in a family or something like that. Just for it's a shame that it costs that much to live in the city of Miami now. But the budget for the office when I got into office was about $400,000 a year, and that included everything from hiring of staff, discretionary funds for events, or if you needed vehicles, or you wanted uniforms for your staff, or you wanted to give to a charity. A lot of those things came out of the discretionary fund, which is about $400,000. Didn't go very far when you're trying to build a staff. You could either have 3 or 4 well properly paid folks, or 7 or 8, folks that are a little bit hungry but working, right out of college kind of thing. Unfortunately, what they did, and I fought this over my time there, they dissolved the NET department, which was the neighborhood enhancement team, which was a full department with directors handling all constituent services and permitting in neighborhoods and things like that. They simply dissolved it, firing everyone that was on those staffs, and then absorbed that budget into the commissioner's offices. So now each commissioner has about $1.5 million a year to play with. And so this last 2 years, you see trucks branded up with commissioners' names, like pretty much like a campaign vehicle. It gives incumbency a lot more strength because you can use that money to advertise yourself and the good things you do, pretty much. is how it's become to be used. But it also gives you a lot more if you wanted to spend on good staff. If you wanted to hire like a real attorney on staff, it was really important to me because I never trusted my city attorney. I always wanted to have a lawyer on staff because I wasn't one that could really help me know whether the wool was being pulled over my eyes or if something was ethical or truly legal.
Yeah, when I heard that those net teams had been consolidated underneath the commissioner's office, it smelled like a power grab.
It was
That means to consolidate power underneath each commissioner.
Yeah, it was money. It was really money and kind of campaigning. It was under the table campaigning basically.
What is the I guess in the scheme of things, in the legislative scheme of things, how do the committees, task forces, and boards and councils do they factor in to how the commissioners are able to like oversee particular issues in the within the city of Miami?
There is something like 40 boards and councils in the city of Miami,
53.
committees. So thank you very much. Better than I. It's grown and it really frustrates the clerk because he has to manage all of their minutes and records and qualifications and tenures and everything like that. It only frustrates him because he doesn't see, and I'm not speaking for him, the fruits of their labor expressed in commission action. Those boards are only effective if the commission heeds their advice. And very, way too often, the advice of the Planning Zoning Appeals Board or the Historic Environmental Preservation Board are not only ignored by the commission as a majority, but often taunted and even pushed back on purposefully by the commission, disdainfully, spitefully. They don't honor or respect the volunteer service that people give to be on these boards and the decisions that they're making because they come from places of expertise. Someone on the urban design review board or the planning zoning appeals board, these are people who really understand the code or architecture or what's appropriate in a given density neighborhood, for example, or historic environmental preservation. You're dealing with historic structures and tree appeals and all those things. These are people with expertise in these fields. So some of them we're required to at least hear from before we make a vote, but their recommendation isn't binding on our vote. But it shows up in the record. City Commission voted this way in contravention to the recommendation of the Planning Zoning Appeals Board, which unanimously voted that this was a bad project, but the City Commission voted overwhelmingly in favor of it. That at least puts a record on the fact that these guys did it against the will of the experts. And it doesn't have a binding effect of teeth, but it shows a track record of their vote. I constantly tell people not to get discouraged as board members because they are making a difference, and it's better that they're there than not. It is a check and balance on the commission, we hope, in terms of what the residents see, because they spend hours at these boards and what they talk about matters. And it's just hopeful that we have a commission that listens to them and empowers them versus ignoring or spiting them.
And that the commissioners, if there is some degree of such disdain for what the boards have to offer, the advice that they give, where do typically do the commissioners get their, I guess I want to say, marching orders, or where do they get their expertise? I have an idea. My instincts tell me it begins with D and ends with S, but I was curious as to what you had seen.
Well, it typically starts with lobby and ends with ist. There are people who are very well paid to tell commissioners how to think and feel about an item. And if you could take the negative connotation away from the word lobbyist, because I've recently become one for an environmental group, and I never thought I would be a lobbyist. But the idea is you're trying to affect a decision of a legislative body. That is the definition of a lobbyist by its purest form. There can be lobbyists for good and lobbyists for bad. It all depends on what your clients are trying to achieve. And even for the clients who are trying to achieve something probably a little more egregious or greedy than what they should, you have good and bad lobbyists working for them who will either be honest with commissioners and tell them the whole story, or the ones that are simply trying to do the work of their client and pull one over on you. And so, as a commissioner, it's your job to decide how much you want to listen to them. Because on a land use issue, for example, I've got the developer and the lobbyist in one ear. I've got the administration, the city staff, which has their own planners and attorneys and zoning experts, telling me on the other side, and not always on the other side, but as a counterpoint potentially. And then you've got your own staff, right, who are doing their own diligence on the issue, that the zoning application at hand, whether it's right or wrong, what's being asked for, whether it's just or not, whether the public benefits are sufficient, for example. And it's your job as the commissioner to take all of that in. And to me, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to hear what the lobbyists have to say. You just have to take it with a big grain of salt, because sometimes they're going to tell you something even your administration's not telling you. And sometimes it's for the benefit, that project may be for the benefit of the community if it is a good project, maybe for the bad if it's a bad project. Sometimes it's a good project, but they're being too greedy and they need to be brought back into what is appropriate or standard for that community or neighborhood, or give back to the community in terms of affordable housing dollars or green space or whatever it is. Or sometimes it's a hard no. But how you get your information, you've got to follow your gut to start with. But from there, you gather as much as you can and see which sources you trust or not, and recognize how everyone in the whole paradigm is motivated.
That being said, I mean, as a former commissioner, I guess what advice would you give to citizens that are looking to make a positive impact on on the types of policies that affect them that are coming out of City Hall?
Yeah, I mean, be an optimist, pick your issue, get educated about it, and then be confident that you can make a change, even as a single person or as a coalition or as an HOA or as a nonprofit group. You absolutely can make a difference. And that really opened my eyes up as a resident before I was involved. And I'm embarrassed to say it. When I had an issue with my park in front of my house, I had to say, who is my commissioner, before I could call them and complain or find out or ask those questions. And it was a real eye opener for me that that commissioner then came to my house and said, "Congratulations, you have a commissioner in your home. What now?" And the arrogance that was being, presented to me, that I realized I can talk to this community about this issue, and we can turn this around with this commissioner or with this commission body. And we were successful. Um, it's a labor of love to do those things, but it's an issue you care about, whether it's an environmental issue or an overdevelopment issue or a transit issue or a homeless issue. All those things are voted on by the commission and affected very significantly. So don't feel like you're not listened to. I have watched commissioners change their vote on the dais based on what was said at public comment. It can happen. It does happen. You want to, act from the heart and speak from the heart. Canned petitions and email drives work less than your words from your heart being sent or called in, or spoken at a lectern. But it can make that difference. But have your tools and be educated. Know what's going on that dais among that body, and know what you're trying to fix and change.
So on the dais, you have first readings, you have second readings. Those are, I guess,
Ordinances.
okay for ordinances, and then
Yes.
you have the RAs. That's resolutions,
Those need one reading, one vote, one reading, one meeting. Yeah.
and resolutions are just designed to direct the actions or the will of the commission.
Of the administration, yes, and the body of the city, yes. Yeah.
Okay, and then I guess discussion items, are they just merely that, just where the commission just discusses, or
Yes, they have no binding effect. They could lead to legislation. Even in that moment, a resolution could be passed even without notice, which is hairy because you really want to pass things that the public have had time to digest and the other commissioners have time to digest. So we have what's called a 5-day rule that if something is brought on the dais, it can be basically vetoed by a single commissioner if they haven't had time to digest it properly. The only way around that is if they can deem it an emergency, and prove the timeliness, with the backing of the city attorney and the other commissioners. What ends up happening is, well, let me not get beyond the discussion item. What you're asking about is, yes, meant to be a place where commissioners can just introduce something that they're concerned about or their residents are concerned about that they want the other commissioners to know about or they want input from them. And it could be like, I'm thinking about bringing legislation about this issue, but I want to kind of test the waters here and see how you guys feel about the homeless issue and how we're going to go forward with that, the affordable housing issue and how we're going to forward. So you set an agenda item as a discussion item. Typically, however, what it's been used for is a weapon. And you throw a discussion item on an agenda to let the other commissioners know what you're going to drop on them. And it's been weaponized in the sense that someone will say, discussion item, the manager's discretionary budget or something like that. And so then the manager starts sweating, knowing, all right, someone's going to take me to task on how I've been spending my money. And so then that commissioner will bring another item in that same agenda where he needs the manager's support on something, to back him for whatever, and he'll do the same thing against another commissioner. They'll say, all right, the excessive noise happening in District 2 must be discussed. And I'm the District 3 commissioner. What's that about? Well, apparently I'm going to go on the offensive that you're not doing your job as a commissioner for your constituents or something like that. And then they then use that to start that discussion or use it as a threat of what might come. So that's one way it's handled. I
So it's a
apologize
means.
for the unprofessionalism here, but I have to just answer the door really quick for
Oh,
for
no worries.
something. So I'm here and I can hear you. Hold on just a
Yeah,
second. Go ahead.
yeah,
Ask the
no
next
problem.
question.
Yeah, I just want to see is it kind of like a means to pick a fight? A discussion item can be used. Can be a means for a commissioner to pick a fight with somebody else.
Very, very often, yes, that is the case. And it can be weaponized. It's not meant to be that way, but that is often the way it's used.
And consent agenda items, what exactly do they do?
I apologize. I'm just answering the door. I'll be right back.
Oh, no worries.
Sorry for
Take
this.
your time. Take your time. We're almost done. Yeah, just these last couple of things.
All right, I'm back. Sorry, what was the last question?
Oh, I was just going through the the running of commission meetings, getting some definitions. The consent agenda. What exactly is the purpose of that?
Ooh, this is a tricky one. So this is where you put things on an agenda that you don't want to talk about.
Ah,
Consent agenda is where you pass things in a batch, as one vote. And consent means we all give into this. We're all okay with this. And typically there will be, let's say, 7 or 8 items at the beginning of the agenda. They're meant to be innocuous. And that way we work through the process of the day quickly. So there'll be mostly administrative actions that need to be approved, a grant or an easement or something like that. Something that no commissioner has any problem with. That's what the consent agenda is meant for. You're supposed to study them beforehand. So at the beginning of the day, once the agenda is set, the chair will ask, is there anything anyone would like to pull from the consent agenda? Because we're going to vote as a block and you're going to be all up or all down on all of these. You can't have it halfway. So if there's one you're having hesitation about, you want to pull that out. So you can either ask questions about it or vote against it so that you can then vote up the remainder of the consent agenda. Nobody votes down an entire consent agenda. It doesn't make sense. There's a lot of just administrative items in there unless you're just trying to be difficult. But what ends up happening is people put very consequential things in a consent agenda, which really isn't appropriate. And it's a lot of times if something is controversial, they'll put it in there. And sometimes they'll even do it as a courtesy. Let's say, for example, They wanted to name a street in the city of Miami after Donald Trump or something like that. And they just did it at the county, actually, and some of the Democrats actually voted for it. And so they might put that in a consent agenda to help you save face. So you're not voting on it specifically as an individual item and it's not a big deal made out of it. But they want to get it passed, but they don't want to have the fight. So that's where you put it. But very often the other commissioners will smell it out. If you put something in there controversial, they just say, no, I want to pull that item. I want to talk about that item. And then they'll ask their questions, have their fight, vote against it, whatever they want to do.
Okay. And for public hearing items, is that just the something that you want that a commissioner would want to put in there so they can get public input on it?
Yes, and that falls very akin to a resolution. It has about the same effect. It has the same threshold of public comment. They're the same, and neither of them affects the code as per se, but it has the same 3/5 voting threshold. So the public hearing items and the resolution items are usually found right on the same part of the agenda and have pretty much the same effect.
And just winding down the for items that are under boards and committees, is that just items that have been brought by the boards and committees that have met previously, or
No, the boards and committees, the BC section of the City of Miami agenda is just for the appointment of board members.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and so each commissioner, based on each board's makeup by its own constitution or bylaws, has a makeup of how many board members there are on the Bayfront Park Trust board, for example. And it also will have a rule of how many each commissioner gets to appoint, if any, the manager, if any. And so you have a responsibility as a commissioner to keep track of all 50 something of those boards and how many appointments you have to make, because so often the commissioners get lazy on that and boards will go empty, like they can't even get a quorum because commissioners haven't appointed their person, and it'll go on for years sometimes like that. That's how little they care about them. But you
Mhm.
need to do that, because in order for them to do their work, the quorum rules say, a majority of our body needs to be here, not the majority of those appointed. And so if our body is supposed to be 5 members and they've only appointed 2, we'll never meet a majority. We'll never meet 3. So that's where the BC agenda is very important, and the clerk keeps really good track of that and reminds commissioners all the time when they have vacancies.
Great, great. And finally, the planning and zoning items. What is the difference between those and say something that's brought on a second reading or
That's
a
a
first
great question.
reading?
Yeah. So the planning and zoning agenda is a complete different agenda from the traditional agenda, but we've now blended it where they get heard on the same days in the same meeting. But if you're so planning and zoning is quasi judicial in the sense that it's not just like political resolutions, public hearings, and oftentimes even ordinances are just political will of the body. I feel this way, I want this, and so I vote like this. Planning and zoning is a complete separate issue that's called quasi judicial. Judicial meaning like you're acting as a court, right? You're not just acting as a politician, you're actually acting as a judge. So you have to follow the rules of a court with witnesses, with testimony, and with binding votes that need to follow a certain criteria, because the applicants in a zoning issue also have rights. I, as a homeowner, if I want to do something with my house, I have certain rights under the code that allow me to do XYZ. So just because a commissioner doesn't like that code, he can't deny me that thing that I want to do. If I want to put that pool in my backyard and it's within my setbacks, he can't say no just because another neighbor complained or doesn't like me or pools have become too problematic for him. He's got to, if he wants to be able to vote against me, he's got to change the code so that with another ordinance and 2 readings, so that when I bring my swimming pool request, he can say no. You have to follow the code and law
So it's
to
kind of like they're an interpretation of the existing code.
it is. And oftentimes the planning and zoning agenda involves appeals, where someone will have been denied something by the city and they're appealing that up to the city commission, so that our vote will either affirm what the administration decided already about a code issue or a tree issue or things like that, or a zoning issue. Or sometimes the lower body will be affirmed and a residential group will appeal, either an abutting neighbor who doesn't agree with something that's been approved or something like that, and then it comes up to commission. This happens a lot with tree removals. The appeals get brought to commission one way or the other. So there's a few bites at the apple that someone will have on a historic preservation issue or a code issue. A lot of those are handled in the planning and zoning agenda, especially changes of zoning, which is a very high threshold for a folio in the city to get a change of zoning, to go from single family home to duplex, or duplex to a 4-story or beyond. That's a very high threshold that falls within the planning and zoning agenda. Those are usually two reading issues as well. A lot of them. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Oh, well, I just have to say this has been very educational. I appreciate you taking the time, Commissioner. Uh, this is I just have to reiterate. Yeah, these are the types of things that I feel that the city of Miami needs in order to again be a little less confused about their own government. And I think it's important, particularly when all the charges about Miami corruption. I think that Miami would be a little less corrupt if it's just a little bit more transparent. And I
Mm.
I appreciate you taking the time to make it a little bit more transparent about
Thank you, Rob, for
how
doing
this
this, because
works.
I wish I had you when I was starting, and not so long ago, because I did not know anything that I told you just now before I decided to get involved. And just don't let that intimidate you or anyone around you, because you don't have that knowledge yet. That's not intelligence, right? That is simply knowledge, and that can be gained. There are books out there, there are people out there, there's the internet. And so nobody can take that away from you or tell you you're unqualified because you don't know those things yet. All you need is the willingness to affect your community in a positive way, and the willingness to learn and make good decisions. That is the entirety of your qualifications needed. Beyond that, you can learn everything I just talked about and more.
You definitely learned a great deal, and we appreciate you sharing that and partaking that knowledge, or like disseminating that knowledge to the rest of us. So,
Not at all. Thank you.
uh,
Thanks for helping teach it. I'm at your disposal. Anymore I can help to have these sessions. If you want to focus on one specific part of the code or one issue, I'm very happy to help in any way I can. Count on me.
excellent, excellent. I'll definitely take you up on that. And thank you for taking the time. And yes, good luck in the in your lobbying activities and in your continued activism. I see you all over the place. So yeah, that's always good, and that's what I've always was impressed about you, that you are continuing to do to fight the good fight. And so
Well, and a warning to yourself, Rob, be careful, because you've now taken the next step of the slippery slope, and you may find yourself a candidate before you know it. It's how it happens. Careful what you wish for.
uh-oh.
This is how candidates are made, just caring about something and then trying to teach others, and then suddenly you realize you're making a difference. So thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you. And you have a good night, sir.
All right, take care. Bye, everyone.